And now we give you Luke Burnt. He's going to talk about going meta, pulling info from encrypted radios.
Cool. Thank you all, you wonderful people. So, let's dive into this. I'm not qualified to be giving this talk. I'm not an RF ninja, although I will say I just got my ham technician's license, so I'm very excited about that. I'm not a security pro. I did it one time, do research funding, but no qualifications there. And I'm definitely not a data scientist. But that's why I want to, all of you, I got this to work, so I think all of you can too. So I'm going to walk through the basics, the tools I used, and then a little bit what I did. So through this, I hope to provide, an understanding of what trunked radio systems are, different tools out there, including one that I wrote, some of the different data types that you can extract from the systems, and encourage you all to give it a try. And all of this has really been built on work other people have done, so I'm going to try to highlight that as I go through this. So let's dive into it. So first, I'm just going to go through some terminology. Talk groups are just a way to organize conversations. They can be topical and or geographical. And they also give you a clue about the interest of whoever is talking or listening on those groups. So if you're part of that, it means you care. Example here, this is Washington, D.C., the wonderful city slash territory slash district that you're currently in, and the different police districts in there. And you'll notice on the chart there, that's some of the different talk groups, and they have a different talk group for each police district. So again, you can see how you can start pulling clues from this sort of organization of information. When you start looking at radio systems, broadly they can sort of break down into two different types. You have conventional systems, and in those systems you have an RF channel dedicated essentially for that talk group or that purpose or type of conversation. And they're static, sort of fixed allocations, so they don't really change that often. However, in trunking systems, you have dynamic allocation. So talk group is only assigned a frequency slash channel when they want to talk. They say to the system, hey, I've got to say something. The system says, hey, I have this RF frequency available. Go talk there. The benefit of doing this is you can have lots of talk groups, lots more talk groups than you have channels. So that also lets you get very specific on the type of talk groups you have. You can have 4 people in a talk group, so you can have a lot of specificity there. And back to that means you get a lot of information about what they're going to talk about. And I'm not going to dive too much into this, but you have analog and digital systems. Analog systems are where the speech is directly encoded into the RF signal. With a digital system, first you go through a vocoder, which translates it into those ones and zeros. So Project 25, I have a long and sordid history with Project 25. It's standards for digital radios, started for interoperability and creating more efficient markets for mostly public safety, think state, local, federal, and DoD, government entities, to have a way to communicate. The standard effort was kicked off way in 1989, so a long time ago. It prides itself on being user-driven, so all the requirements for the systems came from different user groups contributing that. And the radio companies actually worked together to help come up with these standards. And note that there weren't any security people involved really in any of this, and it was started in 1989, so even the technology available and the thoughts then were, let's say, not so advanced. So that is prelude to what will come. At the same time, it's still extremely popular and widely used. $250 million in sales is a pretty big projection per year. So this is something that is popular and probably will continue to be popular for a long amount of time. So today, we're really going to be focusing on digital trunk systems. That's where you have that trunk and control channel, and that's where we're going to be finding a lot of information that's interesting. So, a little bit on how I got into this mess. First job out of college, I went to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I started working on public safety interoperability. So started going to the different P25 meetings, working with the different users, understanding their concerns and the frustrations they had, and then also working with radio manufacturers and also understanding how they have to make money and profitability and sort of the overhead on getting conformance testing and how all that all comes together. So a very interesting intro into all of that. While there, I got to work with Mike Osman, who is a rock star and has put together a lot of great hacking tools. But I met him before any of that, and he was working alongside me on some of the Project 25 standards, and he had a focus on the different security elements of the standard and started working with software-defined radios to start poking around in there. Of course, that kept his interest, and fast forward a few years, Mudge, who's sort of a local hero in the area, went over to work at DARPA for a little bit. He started up the DARPA Cyber Fast Track program where they gave small grants, still $250,000 or so, but government small grants, out to different people in the community to work on projects. Mike Osman had a project he proposed where he would create hacker-friendly radio, and that's where the HackRF Jawbreaker was born. So as part of that, he came up with the design, got them fabricated, and then handed out 150 to the community, and I was one of the lucky recipients of one of those. So, sweet, I got my free SDR, now what should I do? So people are probably familiar with scanners. They are able to receive a single channel at a time, but an SDR doesn't have that type of limitation. It can receive everything. So inspired by this interesting post in software by Rachel Crowell, if you go back and look for on Hacker News, you'll see lots of familiar people jumping in saying, wow, that's interesting. And I said, hey, this looks fun. So I went off, and 10 years later, here I am. So the good news is that the software-defined radio space has opened up a lot. So when I say SDR, it's just short for software-defined radio. And now there's cheap $35 dongles that can get you started, and stick around. I have 3 of them. They may or may not work perfectly, but here to give them away. Give it a try. End of the talk, come find me. And this is a great way to get started. So this is a very accessible hobby, time sink, who knows what. So I encourage everyone to jump in. An easy-to-use software program that I love is called GQRX. It pulls up what the SDR is receiving and displays it graphically. So it's really easy to see where the signal is. You can tune around, find interesting things. It's a great gateway drug. And you can even, for analog signals, just pull it up and start listening too. So great way to see what's around you and get started. However, once you want to start figuring out a little bit more what's happening on those different channels, Radio Reference is a good resource for that. It's different members of the community sort of submitting, here's my local system, here are the frequencies, here's the different talk groups, and sort of the description associated with each talk group. So pull this up, look at your local community system, look at what's going on there. So finally, from all of that, here's the program I put together. It's called Trunk Recorder. It lets you record all of the conversation on a trunked radio system. Also works conventional systems too, and DRM for the fans out there, DRM. We're going to make that work for trunk DRM systems eventually, but this has been ongoing for over 10 years now, and never thought it would keep going for that long when I started. And of course, as the theme standing on the shoulders of giants, this is all built upon GNU Radio, which is an amazing software toolkit out there for working with software-defined radios. It does lots of signal processing, and it makes it easy for non-RF people like me to get started and work on it. Also, there's been some great modules for that. GR SmartNet was one of the first ones out there to help decode trunked radio systems. And then OP25 is another great project built on GNU Radio for Project 25 radios and a bunch of other things. So I'm pulling all of those different elements together and then just building a scalable system around that. It runs on top of Linux and Macs too, and if you're really creative, you can spin up a VM and get it to run on Windows, but that is going to be more trouble than it's worth. So from all that, I ended up with a lot of .wav files sitting on my computer. The next evolution was, how can I share this, and how can other people in the community running the software share their transmission? So that led to Open Megahertz. This website also has grown beyond anything I thought it would be. It has 30-day of archive, so you can go back and see what happened. It also is very sketchy web reliability. This is me maintaining it, so It's not 100%, but it's mostly up. But shockingly, there's about 220 systems live on it, and I just pulled the stats. That's about 43 million transmissions a month, and that's over 2 terabytes of compressed audio each month coming through too. So each day there's 150,000 minutes of audio per day, which is crazy. So I never thought it would be like that, and I'm still amazed it's up and running. So also don't everyone go there at once, because it won't be after that. Okay, so that's the prelude. That's the tools, how I got into it, the tools you can use to get started, and a little bit about the different radio systems there. So we're going to go talk about some of the encryption that goes on top of this. I pulled this from a CISA document that I linked down below. Nothing I'm talking about today is a 0-day or some unknown vulnerability. This is all well-known, well-documented, very well-studied issues with the standard itself. So we're all really focusing right now. This is a broad system. It has both wireline and over-the-air interfaces. The interface we're really focusing on is called the common air interface, and that's between the tower and the handset subscriber unit. And there's 2 different types of traffic that go on over that. You have both control messages going back and forth. Those are pretty powerful. That says, I want to talk on this channel. You can go talk on that channel, that back and forth. But also things like turn on the mic for this radio without someone knowing, brick this radio. There's a lot of things that have, back to this being user-driven, users said this would be really handy to have. Radio manufacturers said, sure, let's get that in there. And so it's in there. So that's back and forth on the control messages. I'll focus on a few that you can really just get from doing passive listening. So we're not doing any active conversations with the tower back and forth. This is all just listening to things going along that channel. And then there's also the voice messages. And those on encrypted systems, that's really what's encrypted. It's the voice messages. So there's been standards in place for encrypting the voice from, and I tried to find this, but there's maybe 1999-ish. And that's pretty widely adopted. So the local DC system is sort of a mix. We have the fire department is in the clear, and the police department, that's encrypted. So the next layer up is none of the communication is, for the most part, authenticated. So the end subscriber unit, it could be approved radio, or it could be someone replaying something, or who knows what. There's, on both sides, you don't know you're talking to the real system, and the system doesn't know it's talking to a real radio, and there isn't really a way to prove that. So that's not great. There are standards that have been put in place, but it's not been widely adopted. And then it comes to those actual control channel messages. Those are not encrypted. Right now, there's not a standard in place to do that, and so of course this isn't widely used. And while we're talking standards, all these standards aren't free. You have to go to TIA, and they're the standards body behind all this, and that costs in the order of $150 to $200. Luckily, there's the Internet Archive, so if you go over there and maybe type in TIA-102 series documents, you don't get all the recent ones, but you can get some of those documents. So just saying, I'm passing that along. Again, none of this is novel. Here are some great papers to read on this, some of them from 2010, when really this was dug into in depth, followed up by something in 2023 from CISA.gov, and that's that larger document sort of walking through the different types of encryption and sort of the rationale for doing that. Also point out that Sally Yates had a great presentation at DEF CON 31, so go check that out. It's longer, goes into more depth on how to use these tools and some of a broader look at what can be done there. So for control channel analysis, I'm going to be focusing on 3 different things and sort of walking through how those can be used. Looking at transmissions, and this is back to when you say you want to transmit and you get that channel to talk on. You also have to say what radio unit you are, so you get a nice association of who's actually talking. There's registration. That's when you turn on a radio and it says, hey, I'm on the system, I'm around. And you get, again, the radio ID when you do that. And then affiliation. That's when you take your walkie-talkie and you turn to a specific talk group. And so you get a sense of which radios are listening to which talk groups. Back to, there's more active things you can do back and forth, not looking at any of that. This is all passive, and you can just sit there and listen to it. So basic setup here is I just running a simple $35 SDR, running trunk recorder. This is on my laptop, but it works great on a Pi 4 for this type of stuff, even a Pi 3, go bold. I wrote a really quick and dirty plugin, which I'm going to be releasing once I put some more documentation in there. All it's doing is taking all this traffic and writing it to an SQLite database. And finally, just Jupyter Notebook, pulling that in and doing some simple Panda stuff, which was not simple for me, but thank you, ChatGPT. So, long and short, there is a lot of encryption. It looks almost like 75% of the calls I were capturing over those 9 days were encrypted. But that could simply be, maybe the police talk a lot more, could be a larger force. And I think some of the other departments are also using some of the encrypted channels for no good reason, but there it is. So to start with this analysis, I looked at the stuff that I could receive in the clear, just to try to look at different associations. So back on, say, January 4th, there was a box alarm, which is a large fire. And you could look at all of the different walkie-talkies tuning to the firegram channel. So essentially, everyone wanted to know what was going on. They wanted to follow this. And you could see sort of that large spike on the affiliation right there. Ooh. Sorry. So that's just sort of the audio. It's not that interesting, but essentially they listen out a lot of units. Similar, here are all the transmissions happening at that channel. So you notice here, there were about 200 radios listening. We got to a maximum of about 50 transmissions per, I think 15 minutes is the binning I was doing. So you can see here just sort of a ratio of the level of interest versus the amount of activity. And you can also then look there too at the duration of the event. So you had a lot of transmissions. It was a single family home with smoke showing, so that looked like something interesting, but they were able to put it out quickly. So you can sort of look at how quickly that dies down. So let's try to apply this. So there's police talk groups. Those are all encrypted. This one just seems alluring. It's the Special Operations Division, the Emergency Response Team. And over the past week, there was bomb threats that were called in for the entire school district of DC. And as a parent of kids who are in the school district, that was not great. However, as someone who maybe delayed putting their slides together and was looking for interesting material, that worked great for me. So you can see January 10th, there's this huge spike on this talk group. Other than that, it's small daily things, little blips. But you can see this very large spike here. I don't know if it was in response to that, but there's a good correlation there. So we can go which radios, so you can see about 20 or so radios affiliated with that talk group. What I did was then looked at which were the radios that tuned into that talk group. So you can now see which radios are really sort of associated with that police group. And then you can look over time when they're turned on. So you can also see, for the most part, only a few radios are turned on every day and associated with that. So you can assume there may be a lot of special equipment that gets turned on when big events happen. Remember that there's the handheld radios, but then there's also the radios in vehicles too that get powered up when you turn on that large thing to respond. So this is pure speculation, but it could be that if you look back, one of those radio IDs actually correlates back to this humongous big black response vehicle. So with someone smarter than me and probably with better visibility and time could start correlating this all together and trying to figure out which special vehicles associate with which radio IDs, and then looking at when they're active, and that's probably a signal something related to that vehicle's purpose is going on or may go on in the future. So some interesting things you can start pulling out, even though all the audio is encrypted, and I have no idea what they were saying or what this was about, truly. But to circle back, I just want to hit upon sort of why transparency in this is important. The DC dispatch center is a complete disaster. Multiple people have died because of mistakes they've made in dispatching. We have quadrants in DC. They get them confused. So they'll send it to the exact wrong part of the city. They don't know the city that well, and they also don't always dispatch the right type of units based upon the type of call coming in. So you wouldn't know any of this if you didn't have access to the actual dispatch audio going over the air. So luckily there's been people really digging into this, and that audio being available has really helped point that out. Also, issues around police misconduct, having transparency around audio and what they're saying and reporting and doing gives the public greater trust into what they're doing on your behalf. And finally, adding encryption makes interoperability more challenging. Key sharing is tough, especially on these radios, especially to multiple devices in the field, and keeping that up to date is not easy. And these systems don't make it easy, so there's some aspect to that. So ultimately, I'm a little conflicted. Like, I have this great project based around open radios and accessing this data. So these flaws are interesting to me, and I'm happy that I'm able to provide this trust and transparency to the community. But at the same time, there's a good reason some of this stuff should be secure, and these systems aren't designed that well or secure. So ultimately, I think what could happen is, trying to improve the design of these to make sure the things you want to be secure are secure. Whether that will happen because they're in place and they're 10-year investments, I don't know. But then also following that up with real genuine community discussions on what types of things should be open and trying to balance these equities back and forth. So I don't know if any of this will happen, but this is big. In an ideal world, it would be great if something like that did go forward. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the different radio systems, the terminology here, so it's a little less scary, and some of the different tools you can use. And maybe next year you can then build upon some of this, and hopefully there'll be some good talks that maybe go a little bit more in depth with data science ninjas and some RF people going into this. But some of the really interesting ideas are you can start clustering radio ideas around where they transmit and what they listen to, and get a better sense of these IDs and these radios and these people are associated with these interests and talk groups. And then really pulling out to where do they operate. So you can start looking at this is special equipment that's dedicated to this. And finally, what I'd love to see, take a Raspberry Pi, one of those lights that spin around and flash, and have that go off when you start seeing all of these things, the statistical stuff being pinging and you're hitting thresholds. Just flash that a light and be like, something's going on and it could be near you. So I'd love to see that. If anyone wants help or wants to hack on that with me, come find me afterwards, and definitely stop by for some SDRs. Thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions. No, we do not. Okay. Come find me after. I'll hang around.